He was the Prime Minister who let it all hang out. He could laugh with joy over national success in a yacht race.
I tell you what, any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum.
He was not embarrassed to shed tears for a drug-addicted daughter.
You don't cease to be a husband. You don't cease to be a father.
Or to weep for the victims of Beijing's Tiananmen Square massacre.
Anti-personnel carriers and tanks then ran backwards and forwards over the bodies of the slain.
Robert James Lee Hawke was no plastic politician. His emotions, his flaws, his virtues and his vices were there for all to see.
I've made no attempt to hide my character.
Before he entered Parliament, especially in his years as head of the trade union movement, Bob Hawke drank and swore and womanised with a recklessness just about unprecedented in public life. Many Australians liked the larrikin image, but it became clear, including to the man himself, that the lifestyle, especially the dependence on alcohol, was incompatible with his political ambitions. So in May 1980, 5 months before contesting and winning the seat of Wills in Victoria, he announced he was giving up the grog.
I could never have been Prime Minister if I hadn't made the decision.
Not a drop passed his lips for the next 13 years, and reporting on him for every one of those years, Nine's Laurie Oakes.
Mr Hawke transformed himself. It wasn't just about going on the wagon. He dressed better, improved his grooming, cleaned up his language, changed his whole approach to life. In short, he turned himself into the kind of person he thought a Prime Minister should be. It was an amazing study in self-discipline.
Australia's 23rd Prime Minister was born on December 9, 1929 in Bordertown, South Australia, the son of Clem, a congregational minister, and Ellie, a schoolteacher. The family moved to Perth 10 years later. In 1953, Bob graduated in law from the University of Western Australia and went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, there setting his famous speed drinking record, a yard of beer in 11 seconds. He never lost the skill. He and Hazel Masterton married in 1956. They had 3 children, Susan, Stephen and Roslyn. A fourth, Robert Jr., died in early infancy. Mr Hawke conceded in a 1981 interview that life with a nationally known boozer and ladies' man had not been easy for Hazel.
Often there are women around and stories around.
He went to work for the Australian Council of Trade Unions in 1958, became president in 1969 and built public recognition and popularity through the resolution of industrial disputes. The industrial peacemaker reputation gave credibility to his consensus approach when he made the switch to parliamentary politics.
I've said for a long time that if I went into Parliament, being the sort of person I am and thinking that I have certain capacities, I would try for the top position.
He got to the top after a close challenge, followed by months of undermining and pressure, which saw Bill Hayden bow out as Labor leader. On the very day Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser called the 1983 election. By any measure, Mr Hawke was a successful Prime Minister, not only because he won 4 elections, but also because he led a government with the guts to tackle such tough reforms as floating the Australian dollar, deregulating the financial system, introducing fringe benefits and capital gains taxes, and privatising government enterprises, including the Commonwealth Bank. Treasurer Paul Keating helped power the reformist drive. But it was made politically achievable by Mr Hawke's consensus approach, his feel for what the electorate would tolerate, and an extraordinary popularity level through much of his prime ministership. He spoke emotionally of that in 1990.
I just love Australia and I love Australians. I mean, I love them passionately, and for a fair bit of the time, and a lot of them they've reciprocated, not with a constancy. The measure changes, but I think we're still basically good mates.
The Hawke government was unmistakably Labor. It restored Gough Whitlam's universal health insurance scheme, abolished by the Coalition, boosted payments for low-income households, and gave unions an economic policy role through a prices and incomes accord. But the former ACTU president was also comfortable rubbing shoulders with the big end of town. His view of his purpose as Prime Minister was simple.
Creating the greatest amount of happiness and prosperity and security that you can for your country. That's what your responsibility is.
Economic setbacks, though, gradually eroded some of the Hawke gloss. 17% mortgage rates, followed by a slump and rising unemployment.
This is a recession that Australia had to have.
Also, Mr Hawke's relationship with an ambitious treasurer wanting a turn in the top job deteriorated. In late 1988, they signed a secret pact at Kirribilli House, in which the PM promised a leadership handover after the 1990 election if Labor won. It did win, but Mr Hawke reneged on the agreement, sparking an unsuccessful Keating challenge in June 1991.
The fact is, I had only one shot in the locker and I fired it.
No, he didn't. A second shot 6 months later brought down Labor's longest-serving Prime Minister.
Paul Keating polled 5 votes ahead of Bob Hawke, 56 to 51.
But with Hazel and his daughters there for support, the ousted PM told a final news conference that pride outweighed the hurt.
Australia is now a more outward-looking, more tolerant and more competitive country than it was when I came to office.
Even his political opponents didn't dispute that. And when he left Government House, after handing in his resignation that night, ordinary Aussies crowded the drive to show their appreciation.
Thank you for the wonderful 10 or 11 years. Thank you.
Well done.
Australia owes you, Bob.
Congratulations, sir.
We owe you, Bob.
In the last 3 years of his Prime Ministership, Mr Hawke had resumed a clandestine affair with his biographer, former journalist Blanche de Plouget. Once his political career ended, so did the need for discretion.
This is a new life, a new love.
He and Hazel divorced in 1995. Marriage to Ms de Plouget followed. His love for the Labor movement, however, remained constant. And when it seemed he had almost faded from view,
come a waltzing Matilda with me.
Mr Hawke, former PM, simply became Hawkie. Champion sculler, champion of the people.
And the great man Bobby Hawke nailed it. Said, thank you very much, boys. Cheers them. Loves his cricket. Have your cup back. Don't waste the drop.
For his 88th year, a beer brewed in his honour.
Thanks, mate.
88.
Yeah, 88.
It's a beautiful number, isn't it?
Good Chinese number.
And Bob Hawke knew how he wanted to be remembered.
A larrikin trade union leader who perhaps had sufficient common sense and intelligence to tone down his larrikinism to some extent and behave in a way that a Prime Minister should if he's going to be a proper representative of his people, but who, in the end, is essentially a dinky-die Australian.
He's still got the capability of a beer skull. Good on him.
Mark Burrows, 9 News.